All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is May 20th, 2024, about 3:32 p.m. where I am at right now. And today is a holiday, so I'm taking advantage of this free day where I'm not doing back-to-back English classes to come on live and chop it up with the people like I always do. Everybody is welcome to come into the live chat, and I will be responding to every single comment that comes into the live chat, like always. And you just have to be a subscriber. Subscribe for 1 minute, and you'll get to talk to me. You can also follow me on Twitter, Laji Enrique, and I will be responding to that. Andrew Beja jumped into the chat. He said, Kendrick roasted Drake. Absolutely, he did. I think I made it clear my views on the Kendrick and Drake beef. I think Kendrick won the battle, but he created a lot of problematic talking points or a lot of problematic discourse around blackness and what it means to be black. And I have a lot of issues with what Kendrick's saying and also the reason he started going at Drake. But, that's the past. Moving forward, I'm looking forward to see what both of the artists will do, Drake included. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what happens next. But shout out to Andrew Beja for always jumping into the chat and leaving interesting comments as well. I haven't been on live for a while. I've been hella busy, like teaching English classes. I also have my wife's girlfriend here staying with us right now. So that's why we haven't been doing the movie reviews as often. And I haven't been jumping on live because, I've been hella busy with work and that sort of stuff, trying to pay for my tuition to go back to university and that sort of stuff. But over the past week or so, I've gained about 1,000 new subscribers. Most of them are people who are, very religious, and they've somehow stumbled upon my videos of me going to Juma at masjids in different countries. And I want to say thank you to everybody who subscribed, who's liked, who's shared those comments. It really helps me in the algorithm. It helps this channel grow. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's been showing me love. Okay. So, yeah, I just want to say that. But I want to make it absolutely clear. Even though I am a Muslim, I am not a very practicing Muslim. I am not meant to be your online sheikh or scholar or even somebody who is meant to try to, give fatwas or anything like that. You know what I mean? I am not a very religious Muslim. I identify as Muslim. I know I need to get on the Sarat al-Mustaqim, but it's not what this channel is about. This channel is about fighting white supremacy, talking about anti-black racism, sharing my life, traveling and stuff like that, and basically anything that I want to talk about because it's my platform for as long as YouTube allows me to have it. Gonna jump into the comments. Andre Beja says Drake is crying with his girlfriend in kindergarten. That's kind of funny. That's kind of funny, Andre Beja. That's very funny. I don't know if I believe all of the things about Drake being attracted to underage girls or anything like that, but the truth will eventually come to light. The truth will eventually come to light. So, anyway, if you click this video, you saw the title. The title is Book React, and this is a new series that I'm going to start on my channel. As you guys know, I'm a person who is, how can I say this? Very, very interested. I'm fascinated by the study of society, how we created this society that we live in now with white supremacy being the predominant ideology, whether explicit or implicitly in people's minds and hearts, how anti-black racism has spread all across the world and what we could do to fix this. And it's something that is near and dear to my heart, and it's something that I hope to be a part of the solution to. And that's the reason I'm going back to university here in Hungary to go study sociology so I can gain more knowledge about this. But learning does not only include going to university, paying thousands of dollars in tuition. Learning can happen anywhere. With the internet, we can all pick up books. We can find ways of educating ourselves. And this is what I hope to do on this channel as well, to educate myself, but also educate the people and build with the people while we have these very intense and very in-depth discussions and studies on these topics. So I'm starting a new series where I'll be reading books, the entire book, not just chapter 1 or chapter 2, the entire book. So it might take days. Hopefully I can finish a book a week, which is what I want to do. And the first book that we're going to be reading is from this woman named Jessie Daniels. It's titled Cyber Racism, White Supremacy Online, and the New Attacks on Civil Rights. You can find this book for yourself on Amazon. That's all over the world. I believe it's even been translated as well. I will always plug the books for the authors that I will be reading from, and I encourage everybody to go buy the books as well. And let's do a little bit of background on Jessie Daniels. So Jessie Daniels is this white woman we see right here. She is a professor in psychology and sociology. Her research interests are racism, new media and health, incarceration and health, and her education is this. She got her PhD from the University of Texas in Austin. You can reach her here. That is her contact information. And Jessie Daniels is an internationally recognized expert on the internet manifestations of racism. She's the author of two books about race in various forms of media, White Lies, 1997, and Cyber Racism, 2009, as well as dozens of peer-reviewed articles in journals such as New Media and Society, Gender and Society, American Journal of Public Health, and Women's Studies Quarterly. From 1995 to 1999, Daniels taught sociology at Hofstra University, then left academia to work in the internet industry, 1999 to 2000. There, she worked as a senior producer, creating live online events for Fortune 500 companies. She came back into academia through an NIH funded research project at Rikers Island, New York City's largest jail, that explored the role of masculinity and race in promoting health for young men leaving jail and re entering their communities, 2002 to 2005. An article in the journal Health Promotion and Practice, based on that research, won the Sarah Mazelis Paper of the Year award in 2011. From 2012 to 2013, she is an Andrew W. Mellon Fellow, co-leading a seminar that is a conversation between scholars in the humanities and social sciences about poverty, and working on her own book-length manuscript, tentatively called Health and Poverty on Display from TV to YouTube. Her latest project is Just Publix at 365, an initiative funded by a grant from the Ford Foundation that is intended to reimagine scholarly communication in the digital era for the public good. Since 2007, Daniels has maintained a scholarly blog, Racism Review, which regularly gets 200,000 unique visitors each month and has received well over 2 million visitors since it began. Forbes magazine named her of one of 20 inspiring women to follow on Twitter. So this is her story. I checked out Racism Review. The site is no longer up, but I'm sure there was a lot of informative information on there. I want to say this for anybody who's going to be thinking this or listening to this later or criticizing me reading this book or starting this series from a book from a white woman. I think it's good to start this series off with a book from a white person, from a white woman in particular, because this goes to show that anybody can be an anti-racist. What we are talking about when we say we want to eliminate white supremacy, eliminate anti-black racism, this woman here realizes that the issues of white supremacy and anti-blackness relate to everybody, and is a problem that affects everybody, and is something that everybody should be involved in. So I'm not going to discredit her just on the account of her race, for what she will write and what information she has to give and what her research will show. It's important that we listen to the voices of all people in the discussion of white supremacy and anti-black racism in this modern day and age. And so let's not fall into that trap that the white supremacists do when they say, oh, we don't want to hear black voices, we don't want to learn about black history, we don't want education at all from different perspectives, we don't want to be challenged. Let's be challenged. Let's have an open mind, because having an open mind is one of the most important things to have in this life, because we all should learn and grow every single day. So I'm looking forward to reading Jessie Daniels' book. I have not read this book ahead of time, and this is what we will start our series with, Book React to. This is what we will start Book React to as well. So here's cyber racism, and don't ask me where I got this book directly. Don't ask me where I got it, but if you holler at me on Twitter or in the comment section, I'll reply and tell you how to get it for the free ski if you really want it as well. But no, in all seriousness, everybody support the authors, buy the books, and let's support scholarly work. So let's see the table of contents here. How many chapters we have? We have about 10 chapters. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to read the introduction, chapter 1 and chapter 2, and that way we can finish this book in about 5 days. Then we can move on to the next story. All right, so as we read, I will be giving my reactions to certain paragraphs, certain chapters, certain sections. I will not be reading the annotations, the notes. I will not be reading the acknowledgments, but if you are interested in that, once again, buy the book. So, yeah, we're going to start with the preface right here. So, here's what Jessie has to say. I've spent almost 10 years doing the research for, thinking about, and finally writing this book. In the pages that follow, I emphasize the importance of understanding standpoint of the importance of understanding standpoint when critically evaluating information on the internet. So it seems only fitting that I should say something about my own relation to the text. This book grows out of my experience with internet technologies in a wide range of milieu, but particularly from my time spent teaching with the aid of the technology in the classroom in 1996 at a suburban, privately funded university. Students entering college for the first time in the fall of 2008 were born in 1990, about the same time the internet began to emerge, and they have never known a time without its existence. I want to push back against that. As somebody who was born in 1990, I clearly remember life before the internet. I remember before the iPhone, before social media. I remember all of that. I do remember dial-up. I do remember you got mail, but I also remember life before the internet. Anyway, I just want to push back. But no, that is somewhat true. You know, millennials, Gen Z, and everything after, they will not know a life without the internet, or they have not known a life without the internet. Continuing. Now I teach in a publicly funded urban university with students from a diverse range of backgrounds, most of whom have grown up digitally fluent. I wrote this book with them in mind. My research is also informed by working in the internet industry for a time during what came to be known as the dot-com boom. I left academia to serve as senior producer for Talk City Inc., a firm that specialized in providing online community to a client list of Fortune 500 corporations. That foray provided me insight into the culture that gave rise to the internet industry and also some knowledge about the mechanics behind the seemingly auto-magical qualities of the internet. That experience also taught me how very difficult it is to create online community in any predictable way. Along the way, I have had a great deal of fun with internet technologies, meeting new friends, connecting with old friends, and starting and abandoning a number of websites, blogs, and other online spaces. Perhaps what I find most compelling about this new medium is that I have learned new things in and through internet technologies. For someone who loves knowledge for the sake of knowledge, the internet can seem like a paradise, and at times, just wandering this vast universe has afforded me great pleasure. For almost as many years as this book has been in process, I have been involved in brainstorms, an online community comprised of several hundred people from around the world. I have been privileged to meet, pardon, don't know what happened with my camera. Something hit my camera. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, for almost as many years as this book has been in process, I have been involved in brainstorms, an online community comprised of several hundred people from around the world. I have been privileged to meet many of those people in person, forming long term friendships and mourning the passing of one very good friend I met there. I also benefited from the community's material assistance, learning a valuable lesson about what Saskia Sasson calls the imp- imbrication of the digital and the material. I'm going to look that word up later. You know what? Why not look it up now? Imbrication. It's always good to look up words, especially when you don't know them. Imbrication. Imbrication. All right. Imbrication of scales, sepals, plates having adjacent edges overlapping. Compare with valvates. All right, that's still not clear. I'm going to try to look up a different one. Imbrication of the digital and material. Overlapping of edges. Ah, I see. So it's similar to like these scales here. These scales, you see, they sort of overlap. So that's imbrication in play. Okay. The imbrication of the digital and material. So she's saying like they overlap each other. Why don't they just use the word overlap? Sometimes people use long words just to sound smart. Anyway, my standpoint is also informed by internet technologies themselves and by myriad forms of activism I have participated in. I have volunteered my time in a number of internet and technology related endeavors, including Computers for Youth, a New York City based nonprofit. CFY distributes free computers equipped with educational software to low income families in some of the city's poorest neighborhoods. I also volunteer to maintain the websites for my queer church and the shelter it sponsors for LGBTQ homeless youth, and these two are forms of online activism. In 2007, I, along with Joe Fegan, began Racism Review, a blog by a group of scholars, activists who analyze current events through a critical race lens. My purpose in detailing this is to provide context for my digital media research. For me, digital media is not merely an object of study at some remove from the rest of my life. Rather, it permeates every aspect of my life. Yet, while the internet animates me as a source of seemingly endless fascination, most of the people who share this passion and who write the books I read about the internet seem to regard the discussion of race and racism as irrelevant to this brave new world. Alongside my enthusiasm for all things related to the internet and digital media, I also have a lifelong interest, both professional and personal, in trying to understand and dismantle white supremacy. Every time I hear a white person say they want to understand and dismantle white supremacy, they always get a hand clap. They always get a hand clap. They always get a hand clap because it's very hard. It's very hard for white people to understand and actively want to be a part of dismantling white supremacy. Because unfortunately, a lot of white people are very lily. A lot of white people are very sensitive. A lot of white people are, essentially like toddlers in the mind. They need to be coddled. They need to be protected. And they hate the idea that there are some privileges or that we live in a society that they directly benefit from, and they view getting rid of those privileges and benefits as the eradication of their humanity or the eradication of the status quo that has allowed them to live a comfortable life. But that is not at all what white supremacy dismantling would lead to. It would lead to a better society for all people, but still, every time, they always get a hand clap. This just makes me happy always reading this. Anyway, continuing here. In trying to understand and dismantle white supremacy, I have had a lifelong interest in that, she says. In the preface to my earlier book, I wrote about my perspective as an anti racist white lesbian growing up in a family who held decidedly racist values. After reading that preface, my father never spoke to me again and tried unsuccessfully to halt the book's publication. His response was a powerful reminder for me of how white supremacy, male dominance, and heteronormativity are interwoven. That experience also informs my analysis in this current book. I have to say, once again, it's very brave for white people in general to talk about they want to dismantle white supremacy, that they are an anti-racist. Being an anti-racist to most white folks is like being a Klan member to most black folks. Most white people hate anti-racists. Most white people don't understand anti racism or the activism of wanting to be in the anti racist movement. So, hearing that her father never spoke to her again because she is an anti racist activist makes perfect sense. And it perfectly aligns with what I said earlier. I am not surprised or shocked. All right. So continuing here. Upon learning that I grew up in Texas in the 1960s and 70s and finished my graduate work at the University of Texas at Austin in the early 1990s, my academic colleagues and acquaintances often remarked that, well, that's a good place to be from when studying white supremacy. That's funny. Hey, she got some funny friends. Hey, that's funny. Hey, I was studying. Hey guys, I'm studying sociology in Texas, and I'm majoring or I'm focusing on racism and white supremacy. And all your friends reply, "Well, you picked the right place." It's like studying Arabic in Saudi Arabia, studying racism. Got to go to Texas, baby. That's right. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I did not. That was a genuine laugh. That genuinely caught me off guard. I did not expect that. All right, and indeed, it is. Oh God, I got to reread that line. So, upon learning that I grew up in Texas in the 1960s and 70s and finished my graduate work at the University of Texas at Austin in the early 1990s, my academic colleagues and acquaintances often remark that, well, that's a good place to be from when studying white supremacy. And indeed, it is. But Texas does not hold a monopoly on white supremacy. No, it does not. In fact, for more than a dozen years now, I have lived and worked in New York City. For 5 of those years, I directed a research project at Rikers Island, the city's largest jail. The fact that 95% of the people who are locked up at Rikers Island are African American and Latino, although black and brown folks make up only half of the city's total population. While the island of Manhattan is increasingly white and only affordable for the city's wealthy wealthiest residents suggests to me that New York City is a very good place from which to study to understand how systematically white supremacy works. Facts, facts, facts. I love that. I love that she understands the larger. See, the thing is, in Texas, of course, they're going to call the N word out to black people pulling away from pickup trucks, or they're going to have horrible laws that have black men be executed in that state at disproportionate numbers, or living in poverty at disproportionate rates, and that sort of stuff. But the same thing also applies to the North. People from the North like to say there's no racism in New York or Massachusetts or that sort of stuff. But when you look at Rikers Island, everybody looks like Simon Hill keeps it trill. When you go to the poorest parts of the city, there's a bunch of Latino folks and a bunch of black folks living side by side, hand in hand, in squalor, right? So yeah, white supremacy is not only about blatant racism, about Klan members and hoods burning crosses. It's about the system as well. Continuing here. So, professionally, I have studied and written about racism and white supremacy in a variety of settings. Personally, I've tried in numbers of ways to challenge the corrosive legacy of white supremacy in my own life, through the people I choose to include in my life, through the institutions in which I choose to invest my time, through the books I decide to read, and through those that I write. Yet the people, the institutions, and the books I read concerned with race and dismantling systems of white supremacy are for the most part unconcerned with or even uninterested in the internet. Thus, my standpoint in this book is rooted in multiple worlds. In one, the focus is on the internet and how digital media shape life in the 21st century. In another, the focus is on critically understanding racial inequality with an eye toward changing it. And in still another, the focus is on gender, male dominance, and sexuality. In this book, I aim to address these disparate conversations in ways that continue new meaning to all of them. As this book went into production, the United States elected Barack Obama, the first African American president. While some have speculated this means we are entering a post racial era, the increased popularity of white supremacy online suggests otherwise. In the days immediately following the election, so many people visited the white supremacist site stormfront.org, discussed at length in this volume, that the increased traffic caused the servers to crash. And that's the end of the preface right here. Once again, I won't be reading the acknowledgments, but I just want to acknowledge this. This book was written in 2009, or at least published in 2009. So, yeah, I would say that this book is still relevant for anybody who's going to say, why are you reading this old book? We're going to be reading we're going to read a lot of books in this series. So some of them will be old, some of them will be new. I'll try to do a good mix of, different years and genres and eras and stuff like that. But yeah, I would argue that for me, being a black person online, I have experienced some of the most blatant racism I've ever experienced. And I believe it's important to talk about racism online because, number one, the internet is increasingly a part of everybody's life. It's the fabric, it's the bedrock of many people's lives. You can't apply for jobs without the internet. You can't, stay in contact with certain family members or friends without the internet. The internet is the public space, it's the public square of the entire planet. And in any public square, people deserve respect. People deserve the ability to be able to be in that public square and not be harassed, you know, un- unconditionally, which is what happens to black people online. Some people might just say, turn off the internet, get offline. What about, people that genuinely just want to have fun on the internet, post things on the internet? Kids want to post, dance videos on stuff like that. You have little black children, they open their TikTok and then they see people are just spamming them with the N word under it, which has happened to black people online. Black people should be able to talk about things online without getting racial slurs hurled at them or death threats sent to them. Anytime there's, something that I talk about on my channel where I talk about my experiences dealing with anti-black racism or my experiences just generally in the world, it could be a video of me eating Peruvian food with my wife. People are in the comment section calling me all sorts of racial slurs and things like that. That's not okay. That's not okay. This is something that is particularly affecting black people. If you are a black creator online, you've experienced everything that I've said and sometimes even more depending on how big your platform is, and that is not okay for black people to experience anti-black racism online. And as we're seeing with Twitter right now with Elon Musk, the white supremacists are even more bold and brazen with the loosening of the hate speech policies on these social media platforms like Twitter or X as it's called and that sort of stuff. And it's not okay. The internet is a public space. It is an important space. We need it to function in our modern society. And Black people deserve to be in spaces and not be ridiculed or insulted because of our race. Period. 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 If you think that it's a, if you think that it's something normal or it's something that should be brushed aside that Black people get called racial slurs online, you would also then have to concede that it's okay for somebody to yell racial slurs at Black people in the street. It's okay for Black people to get racially humiliated when walking into a restaurant or being at a job or that sort of stuff, because these sort of things you say online, they're no different than things that you would say to somebody, in person, or they should be no different. But unfortunately, a lot of people online get that internet courage. They be keyboard warriors, and that's why I challenge anybody who disagrees with anything that I say to come follow me on Twitter. Let's have a debate, and I will intellectually destroy you. And if you get upset that I intellectually destroyed you, we can meet in person and I'll show you these hands as well. Just because I'm smart don't mean that I can't get gangster with you. Anyway, this will be the first chapter that we will read, chapter 1, White Supremacy in the Digital Era. The internet gives millions access to the truth that many didn't even know existed. Never in the history of man can powerful information travel so fast and so far. I believe that the internet will begin a chain reaction of racial enlightenment that will shake the world by the speed of its intellectual conquest. This was written by David Duke. Now, the first part is very true. The internet gives millions access to the truth, millions access to information, knowledge. They can defeat their ignorance. But the thing is, David Duke wants to pollute the internet with his wicked, vile racial science. If you don't know who David Duke is, he's unfortunately from my home state of Louisiana, an avowed white supremacist. He ran for political office multiple times. He's a Klan member, former Klan member, and yeah, he's still active online in small pockets, and unfortunately, a lot of people still listen to him. Anyway, so, white supremacy has entered the digital era. Avowed white supremacist extremists such as David Duke, who is quoted above, were early adopters of digital media technologies. They were among the first to create, publish, and maintain web pages on the internet. The reality that David Duke and other white supremacists were early adopters of digital media challenges prevailing notions about who white supremacists are and about the internet. Many assume that white supremacists are gap-toothed, ignorant, unsophisticated, and uneducated. Others believe that the internet is a place without race. In fact, neither of these notions is supported by empirical evidence. White supremacists have customized the internet technologies in ways that are innovative, sophisticated, and cunning. And the internet is an increasingly important front on the political struggle to contest the meanings of race, racism, and civil rights. The emergence of cloaked websites illustrates a central feature of propaganda and cyber racism in the digital era: the use of difficult to detect authorship and hidden agendas intended to accomplish political goals, including white supremacy. Cyber racism, a term coined by Les Bach and chosen as the title of this book, refers to a range of white supremacist movements in Europe and North America, and to the new horizons the internet and digital media have opened for expressions of whiteness across national boundaries. I have to look into Les Bach. I did not know that Les Bach was the person who invented the term cyber racism. All right. The empirical investigations in this book specifically reference the paradigm shift that global, digital, and participatory white supremacy represents in the information age. Furthermore, the study frames white supremacy as inherent to white identity and examines how this corrodes democratic ideals of equality. The emergence of the United States as a haven for global white supremacy online makes critical the discussion of whether America was built with white supremacy as a central guiding principle and whether equality is available to all citizens, regardless of race. By focusing on cyber racism and specifically on white supremacy, I do not mean to diminish the important progressive rhetoric and political organizing work that is also generated online. Democratic movements organized at the grassroots by people of goodwill with internet enabled mobile phones have transformed elections. In 2007, using email, blogs, Facebook, MySpace, and YouTube, cyber activists organized nearly 10,000 people to the march and protest against a white supremacist judiciary judicial system in Gina, Louisiana, of course. And almost 10 years earlier, black women, excluded by the white dominated mainstream media and the male dominated African American press, took advantage of the participatory quality of internet technologies to organize the Million Woman March. Many take the encouraging signs about the use of the internet to mean that the technology itself is inherently democratizing, while others see the presence of white supremacy online as clear evidence that the internet is a source of danger, which offers little that is of value to those committed to equality. My aim here is to challenge both of these assumptions and to offer a more nuanced analysis that causes readers to rethink the preconceived notions about and means of researching racial equality and civil rights in the digital area. I just want to go back up and give a little commentary about, is white supremacy, what did she say? White supremacy is inherent to white identity. I would agree with that. I would agree with that in general, because whiteness as a concept in and of itself did not exist until, colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade and that sort of stuff, right? There was no unifying white identity. There was no place in Europe where, the French and the Italians said, oh, we're white, we're brothers, we're together in this, right? There was nothing like that. So they always identified with their culture, their language, their region, their nation state, that sort of stuff. So, yes, I do think white supremacy is inherently tied to white identity, because what we want in a non white supremacist world is race to be gone altogether as a social construct. I am a racial deconstructualist, if that does exist, if that term does exist. What I would like to see is a world where, of course, there are no black people, there are no white people, there are just people, which is actually biologically true, scientifically true. There is no difference between me and a white person if you were to peel back my skin and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I do agree with that. White supremacy corrodes democratic ideals of equality. Absolutely, that's true, and white identity does as well. Yeah, I would like to say about the second paragraph. Every time I think about the pros and cons of the internet, I always think about this moment when I was teaching at a university in Tunisia. And one day I was teaching a class about the internet. I was an English teacher there, but I basically had free range to sort of teach whatever I wanted, right? And I taught a class about, social media and how social media has affected the world. And in Tunisia, they had a revolution. Tunisia was the place that was the birthplace of the Arab Spring. And many people were going on Twitter and they were finding out what their government was doing behind closed doors because of the WikiLeaks cables and stuff like that. And basically, they rioted in the streets, overthrew their dictator, who was Ben Ali, and then had elections. And then Tunisia eventually went down the toilet, right? If you talk to most Tunisians today, they don't like their country, they want to flee, and a lot of them dislike it because of the Arab Spring. A lot of Tunisians now miss the days of Ben Ali and that sort of stuff. And I always think about that, that the both sides of the coin. On one hand, they did get rid of a dictator, and a lot of that was through social media, but then the end result was something negative, right? You know what they say, the road to perdition is paved with good intentions and that sort of stuff. So I think about that. And then I also think about my own experiences in my own life, about how, I've been online and I've learned so much. Hell, I'm reading this book to you that I found online and that sort of stuff. But then at the same time, I've had some very heartbreaking moments online, like when I'm talking about my life experiences and all I get are racial slurs or death threats sent to me or my wife, or just realizing that, there's so many racist people out there. Like, just even thinking about that when you're scrolling through Twitter. Now, of course, a lot of these could be Russian bots, or they could just be people who are trolling on stuff. But going on 4chan, going on Twitter, looking in my own YouTube comment section, you realize that there are so many people who are anti-black, who are racist, or who have just sick, twisted thoughts, weird things that they think about other people based on race or nationality, which is absolutely not true. Which is absolutely not true, and it's absolutely, disheartening, heartbreaking to see that much ignorance pervades in the world still to this day. But we're in the fight against it, and that's the purpose of this live stream. So continuing here, All right. Why study white supremacy online? Marx wrote, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. And so the main reason to study white supremacy online is, in my view, to challenge it. Thus, this book is about activism that opposes white supremacy as well as scholarship that aims to understand it. Still, it is fair to question the value of such study, and most scholars and authors are accustomed to answering it. Why, you ask, should I care? When supremacist rhetoric existed in the print only era, it was easier to dismiss their hardly ubiquitous publications as the rants of a lunatic fringe. Now, however, with such racist vitriol easy to locate online, an important shift has occurred. Anyone with internet connection, from a sixth grader doing a report on Martin Luther King Jr. to a disaffected, potentially violent skinhead, can find white supremacy online. However, distinguishing between those producing white supremacy online, those seeking it out, and those stumbling upon it by chance, or ascertaining how people, especially young people, make sense of white supremacy online is a complicated proposition, much more complicated than the mainstream media's report about the dangers of the internet would suggest. So, why should you read this book? Because, in short, the presence of white supremacy online critically informs our understanding of global society, social movements, race, the internet, and even how young people learn in the digital era. And this book helps make sense of all of this. I expand on that answer that this study makes a number of theoretical, methodological, and empirical contributions to a range of intellectual traditions and theoretical perspectives in the next chapter. Very important that we eliminate white supremacy online because, like I've said before, in my previous live streams and videos and stuff like that, just because younger people are being born, right? Just because there are a new generation every 5 years or something like that, that does not mean the ideology of white supremacy will eradicate itself or naturally fade away, or anti-black racism will naturally fade away. Nobody would say Islamic extremism or jihadism will eliminate itself just because there is a new generation of young Muslim men. So a new generation of young white men, young white women, hell, even young black people, because black people and all sorts of people can perpetuate white supremacy. Candace Owens, Thomas Sowell, Clarence Thomas, right? Every generation has a propensity to learn from their ancestors, good and bad. And unfortunately, if you look online, you'll find a lot of Nazi paraphernalia. You'll find a lot of Nazi imagery. You'll find young people, posting memes about Hitler, trying to make Hitler cool for the next generation, posting of swastikas and stuff like that. All you got to do is go on 4chan. I'm pretty sure the average age of the person there is around my age, millennials, Gen Z, whatever is after Gen Z. You know what I mean? Whatever, every new generation can pick up an evil ideology, right? And white supremacy is no different. It morphs and transforms, just like Islamic extremism, just like jihadism, just like any sort of extreme ideology or wicked worldview, right? So, yeah, it's very important we eliminate white supremacy online or try to fight it as best as we can. Of course, an idea can never be fully eradicated, um, at least as far as we know, but we are trying to, and we are hoping for that. We have to be radical enough to imagine a world without white supremacy, but that will take imaginative thinking on actions we can take to eliminate it, right? Continuing here. Estimating the global reach of white supremacy online. A majority of all websites on the internet originate in the United States. Not surprisingly, then, according to the Council of Europe, COE, the majority of the hate websites are US based. America's number one export, white supremacy and hip hop. Hey, with 2,500 out of the 4,000 racist sites originating in the United States. However, estimates on the total number of hate sites are widely divergent and not very reliable. One source from the United Kingdom estimated that there were as many as 10,000 such sites in 2004, with a different source based in France estimated that the number was upward of 60,000 that same year. The number cited by the British source is suspect suspect, as it comes from a software company whose marketing strategy for selling filtering software relies on emphasizing the perceived threats from these groups. The higher number, courtesy of the French, is possibly more reliable, but the source fails to explain how they arrived at those numbers, and they undoubtedly have their own organizational imperative for inflating numbers. So basically, she's saying we don't exactly know. But I would say you don't need a bunch of different websites now. Once again, this is 2009, before social media really blew up. Really, there's only like 5 websites online: YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, uh, and then whatever you want to fill in next, Google in and of itself, right? So yeah, there's really only 5 websites. Most people only visit 5, 6 different websites. So you know, we don't need to know that there's thousands of those hate websites, because everything is sort of aggregated on Stormfront and 4chan and then filtered up through Twitter or Instagram into mainstream discourse and stuff like that. Continuing here. The lowest estimates come from the U.S. based monitoring organization Southern Poverty Law Center, which counted 762 active hate groups in 2004. This number was compiled using hate group publications and websites, citizens and law enforcement reports, field sources, and news reports. Websites that appear to be merely the work of a single individual rather than the publications of a group are not included on the list. Interpreting the SPLC's numbers is further complicated by region. While the UK and French estimates Dell include all websites globally, the SPLC estimates focuses on sites based in the United States. Yet such a criterion creates ambiguity, given how difficult it can be to determine ownership, residence, and server location of a domain name, all three of which can be different. Realistically, estimating the number of white supremacist sites is complicated by the difficulties inherent in evaluating content across languages. Cloaked websites further obscure defining what constitutes white supremacy in the digital era, since they appear to be legitimate sources of civil rights information, yet actually disguise or cloak white supremacist content several page layers down. Still, despite the difficulty of culling reliable statistics, most experts agree that the prevalence of white supremacist sites online with a global reach has increased, and that the majority of these are based in the United States. Once again, I think it is generally true that most of the, because most of the internet is English, most of the internet is American, right? It's, an extension of American cultural export hegemony, that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's not important how many websites there are. It just depends how how the information reaches the most people, and it reaches the most people on these social media websites. Now, of course, you have the fringe that are going deep off into the internet, into websites we've never heard of or places we've never heard of, but it is still filtering up. Once again, it only takes 4 or 5 guys who are deep off into the white supremacist internet land to then bring that and funnel it up through memes, through false data, through constant retweets and stuff like that, or constant video postings on YouTube, right? There's a dark side of YouTube too. There's a white supremacist side of YouTube. If you didn't know, sometimes I get it in my algorithm because I watch a lot of my videos. My videos get 20, 30 views. So YouTube will recommend me videos that have 20, 30 views. And oh, look at that. White supremacists talking amongst themselves. I finally get to hear what it's really stupid. Yep, they're all saying stupid shit. Anyway, gonna continue here. Uh, what is the harm of white supremacy online? Given the information glut generated and made available every day on the internet, one could reasonably argue that white supremacist messages might be lost among the millions and millions of websites on the internet. Even so, white supremacy online is troubling. Consider one, its easy access and global linkages; two, harm it may precipitate in real life; and three, the challenges it presents to honoring cultural values such as racial equality. Yes, let's repeat that. These are the big three. The big three harms of white supremacy online. It's easy access and global linkages. Harm it may precipitate in real life. We saw this with Peyton Gentrin. Peyton Gentrin got turned up off of 4chan racist memes and ended up walking into a supermarket and slaughtering 10 black people. Somebody tell me that internet racism isn't a big deal. Somebody tell me, Simon Hill, get off live and stop talking about internet racism. Somebody tell me to stop doing that, right? Anyway, this is real life, and it has real life consequences. People think what they say online doesn't matter. This is why I show my face. That's why I show my real ass life and keep it real with y'all. Anyway, the harm it may precipitate in real life, and the challenges it presents to honoring cultural values such as racial equality, easy access, and global linkages. White supremacist discourse is certainly more accessible today, thanks to the internet, as David Duke makes plain in the epigraph at the beginning of this chapter. More so than ever before in the print only era, the internet facilitates publication and distribution of white supremacist discourse and ideology for those committed to producing it and increasing its availability to those interested in reading it. I know this from firsthand experience researching my books. For a previous book I wrote addressing print based white supremacist discourse, I was faced with the option of either adding my name to the mailing list of various white supremacist groups, something I was not comfortable with ethically, or visiting the Klans Watch archive or white supremacist materials housed at the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I did. My research for this book did not necessitate physical travel, since I could easily find this material I needed for a discussion of white supremacist websites merely by sitting at any computer connected to the internet. Just as using the internet facilitated my research in some ways, so too does the internet aid the interested in reading white supremacist rhetoric for the purpose of racial enlightenment, quote unquote, as Duke suggests. Basically, what she's saying there, she wrote a book before about white supremacist writing material and physical books, but basically, she didn't want to put her name on this mailing list that would have sent her more material because maybe the white supremacists, could have found her and executed the lady. But she was still able to do the research for that book using the internet, showing that the dissemination of this evil, wicked material is happening a lot online, right? Like Turner Diaries, I'm pretty sure you could find online, or any of their sick, wicked manifestos. Coffee break. Ah, all right. Let's continue here. The the capacity of the internet to facilitate relatively inexpensive means of communication between and among people in dispersed geographic regions of the world is certainly one of the primary benefits white supremacists see in the medium. The fact that this communication can be encrypted and anonymous is appealing for a portion of white supremacists, although certainly not all. Let's repeat that. The fact that this communication can be encrypted and anonymous is appealing for a portion of white supremacists, although certainly not all. No, it's for a lot of them, because let's keep it real. The white supremacists, by and large, are PUSSY. They would not say half of the things they say online. They would not quote any of the stupid statistics they would say in front of a reputable, knowledgeable person, because they know a lot of it is BS. And they know if they said this in person, they would get laughed out of the building, right? And a lot of them are scared because, well, I can't say what I secretly believe because I might lose my job. That is the definition of being PUSSY. As a man, if you believe in something, you should stand on it, regardless of the consequences. That's why I have not deleted a video on my channel. That is why I show my face in every single one of my videos, because everything I say, I'm willing to fight and die over. Every single thing that comes out of my mouth. Every video I've ever put up. Meanwhile, the people who claim to be the master race, who claim to be the people that have conquered the world and done all these incredible things, are too scared to put their faces and names next to their stupid claims. I hate that so much. It bothers me so much. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Because just as a man, forget being black or white. As a man, what type of man are you to look in the mirror and say, I hate black people, but I'm too scared to tell black people in person with my face and identity? Why not? Stand on it. Die on it. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm continuing here. While while anonymity is appealing for some, networked communication simultaneously reinforces what Beck has referred to as a translocal whiteness, that is a form of white identity not tied to a specific region or nation, but reimagined as an identity that transcends geography and is linked via a global network. Recruitment is often mentioned as the chief hazard of white supremacy online. Although the internet is a potential site for white supremacist recruitment, the empirical evidence suggests that thus far, such groups have failed to fully realize this potential. More sinister than possible recruitment is the internet's capacity to globally link white supremacists regardless of national boundaries, thus affirming translocal white identity. The thing is, the white supremacists find it hard to recruit because most people realize you can't get PUSSY as a man being PUSSY, talking about black people all day, talking about other minorities and being hateful to different groups of people. Does not get you women, does not get you money, does not get you clout or fame. It barely gets you attention online. So yeah, their ideas are not attractive, and most white folks just dismiss them as white trash and stuff like that. But the thing is, that does not mean that they are not important to study or a danger or a threat to society. Just like if you have five Muslim Islamic extremists in your society, right, who are hell bent on, you know, bringing back the caliphate or by any means necessary taking down the infidels, whatever crazy thing they believe, that's very dangerous for society because all it takes is one, two, three people to do horrible things that can affect thousands or millions of people, right? So the white supremacists are a danger no matter how small their numbers are. Continuing here. Harm in real life. White supremacy online sometimes leads to violence, harassment, intimidation, and racial terror, transcending the virtual world to damage real, live human beings. In August 1999, Buford Furrow armed himself and walked into a Jewish daycare center in Los Angeles and opened fire, wounding 5 people, including 3 small children. I didn't even hear about that, but that sounds very American. I believe it already. All right. Furrow told authorities that the shooting was a wake up call to America to kill Jews, quote unquote. He reportedly drew some of his inspiration for this attack from white supremacist websites. Similarly, extensive internet files concerning white supremacist Eric Rudolph were found among the possessions of David Copeland, an engineer charged with 3 nail bomb attacks on ethnic minorities and homosexuals in London in April 1999. In these attacks, 3 people were killed and more than 100 injured. Horrible. Fortunately, these types of assaults are relatively rare. That is small consolation if you or someone you love are victims of a hate crime. This book discusses a number of cases in which white supremacist rhetoric online leads to harm in real life, and the analysis aims to balance those attacks' potential versus real threats. So, cultural values eroding the ideal of racial equality online. By the way, before I read this, see, I told y'all. All it takes is a few, one or two, and pew. Anyway, cultural values eroding the ideal of racial equality online. The least recognized and hence most insidious threat posed by white supremacy online is the epistemological menace to our accumulation and production of knowledge about race, racism, and civil rights in the digital era. As David Duke suggests in the above epigraph, his goal in bringing white supremacy to the internet is racial enlightenment, quote unquote, by making the truth, quote unquote, available to millions. Duke's brand of white supremacy undermines hard won political battles for racial and ethnic equality by re-articulating an essentialist notion of white racial purity, borrowing the rhetoric of civil rights. This is an example of the epistemology of white supremacy, an inverted epistemology, as philosopher Charles W. Mills has noted, an epistemology of ignorance, ironically resulting in whites generally being unable to understand the world that they themselves have made. The epistemology of white supremacy reinforces the white racial frame by allowing whites to retreat from pluralistic civil engagement into a whites only digital space where they can question the cultural values of tolerance and racial equality unchallenged by anyone outside that frame. Very, very I like that. I like that phrasing. An epistemology of ignorance, unable to understand the world that they themselves have made. Very, very powerful. I really like that quote right there. So, as the lived experience of the civil rights movement fades with time, hard won political truths about racial equality, secured at great cost, slide into mere personal opinion, open to multiple interpretations. 2 cases discussed at length in Chapter 8 illustrate what is at stake here. The first presents a young woman who reads a cloaked white supremacist site that describes American slavery as a sanitary, humane, relaxed institution. She remarks, "Well, I guess that's 2 sides to everything." Well, I guess there's 2 sides, right? I hate this. There's not 2 sides to everything, okay? There's not always a good and a bad in everything. Some things are just inherently bad, and slavery being one of them. There shouldn't be, well, let's look at the other perspective on slavery. There is no other perspective, period. That might be it's not even closed-minded. It's just looking at the facts. There is nothing inherently good about enslaving another group of people, saying that another group of people are inferior, saying that they deserve less humane treatment because of their phenotypical structure. Like, that makes no sense. And to say that there's two sides to slavery, or to try to whitewash slavery to make it seem not so evil, is inherently evil. This should be basic. But this is unfortunately what they're trying to do in America right now. So even though this book was written in 2009, very, very interesting how they're pointing out things that have sort of led up to where we are now. Well, well, I guess there's two sides to everything, the woman says. In another instance, yet another young woman reading a legitimate civil rights site associated with the King Center in Atlanta questions the site's validity because it's created by his widow, so it could be biased. Okay, all right. Is Martin Luther King not a good person? Is he not the like quintessential great American? Regardless, if you're going to be biased, being biased for Martin Luther King is possibly one of the good things you could have, right? The man literally gave his life to give freedom and equality and justice to all people. But there's some bias because his widow made it. What else was she supposed to do? The U.S. government literally, had a hand in assassinating her husband, so she's not going to honor him. So she step away so that you could see that there's non-bias in this man whose life literally was polarizing while he was alive. I don't know. That's ridiculous. All right. The two sites and how each is misinterpreted suggest that the very idea of civil rights and racial equality are eroded within a digital media landscape. Pardon? That equalizes all websites, while each site presents information from differing points of view, merely suggesting that both are biased, misunderstands the larger meaning here. It is precisely taking into account the standpoint of the site and the reader, whether situated in the white supremacist movement or in the struggle for civil rights and against racism. That facilitates the more accurate reading. The issue of deciding what is biased and what is not is inherently political, and on the internet, making this distinction is even more complicated. Search engines have replaced libraries for young people and in the digital age. Consequently, the internet is often the first and sometimes only source that young people consult when researching race. A random sample survey conducted in 2005 by Pew Internet and American Life Project concluded that over 80% of teens in the United States are connected to the web. My preliminary research of a non random online sample suggests that a significant portion of teens connected to the internet conduct online research, 85%. And of those, large proportion, over 63%, have sought civil rights information online. Whether it is youth of color exploring the history and political struggles of their own racial and ethnic heritage, white youth attempting to understand diverse quote unquote others, or youth of any given ethnicity attempting to craft a personal identity from the clues offered online, search engines are often the first and only information destinations for young researchers. Thus, the early emergence and persistent presence of white supremacy online calls for multiple literacies, one of digital media and one not merely of tolerance, but of social justice, which offers a depth of understanding about race, racism, and multiple intersecting forms of oppression and civil rights in the digital era. Basically, what she's saying is like, a lot of young people at her time, 13 years ago, they were the ones, going online and only getting information from search engines, right? 63%. I would say that's up to like 90% now. Don't nobody go to the library no more. My generation, I swear to God, I feel old now. I feel old. My millennial ass, we were the last generation to go to the library, pick up books, check them out, have them overdue, be too scared to return to the library because you got to pay that late fee, which is going to be $40, and you ain't got $40 to rub together. You ain't got 2 pennies to rub together. So yeah, you didn't check out no more books after that. I'm sorry if I just told my story, but I'm sure that's somebody else's story too. But yeah, this newer generation isn't going to do that anymore. Anyway, all right. So somebody jumped into the comments. Illyrian, once again, proving that the Albanians are racist. I'm going to say this again into the comment section. Albania continues to prove it is the most racist nation. Because this person jumped into my comments and says something that he thinks is going to hurt me. He says, get a life, N word. Do you think that shows that Albanians are very nice people? Does that show that Albania has very educated people? Or does that show, once again, and prove my point, that Albania has the most racist people online? And once again, that white supremacy online is a major problem. This person does not want to be educated. This person doesn't want to read. This person doesn't want to actually wrestle with the facts. He is insistent upon calling black people racial slurs. And for the fact, no, you are not black. No, you are not black, Illyrian. You are not black at all. With a name like Illyrian, you are definitely from Albania. Now, what I offer you to do, Illyrian, is to follow me on Twitter, Laji Mriki. You can send a picture of your black self, verified, holding a note saying that you are black. But I'm sure you won't do that because, of course, you're a coward, you're a racist, you're a person who is not actually built for what you're saying. You would not say any of that stuff to me because I guarantee you, you would catch these hands. But the fact is, Illyrian, I don't even have to spend much time on you because you have proven yourself and you've proven the fact that Albania is the most racist nation that I've ever visited because you people continue to insult black people online. All right. So, once again, white supremacy online is a major problem, and Illyrian is more proof we need to fight white supremacy online. Period. All right. So, Illyrian, you're going to get ignored unless you actually want to listen, learn, and read. But thank you, Illyrian, for proving my point about this text and also about everything I've said before. Continuing here. Some parameters and definitions. This book is about white supremacy online in the context of globalization. I am primarily interested in understanding the obstacles and passageways to working toward a racially just and equitable future by articulating the converging relationship between the social forces of the internet, white supremacy, and global society. In keeping with that overall goal, I am also partly interested in organized white supremacist social movements and the way the internet affects the discourse of those social movement organizations. However, I am less interested in exploring the supposed pathologies of individuals who possess a racist mind or a racist self, as if those two are. Could the self be racist and the mind not be racist? Is that possible? A racist self or a racist mind? I don't know, because nobody's born racist. Like, so the self occurs naturally. So I kind of disagree with that part. A racist mind is sort of developed or inculcated over time. But this saying that there is a racist self, I find problematic. But I don't know exactly where that phrase comes from. I'm new to that phrase. Anyway, so I am less interested in exploring the supposed pathologies of individuals who possess a racist mind or a racist self and leave that to other scholars. Rather, I am more interested in the interplay between extremist expressions of white supremacy and broader cultural expressions of systemic racism and the white racial frame. Furthermore, rather than focus on the backstories of ideologues who create white supremacy online, I am interested in how young people make sense of white supremacy sites that they encounter online. I concur with leading scholars who have long held the racialized masculinity is constitutive of white supremacy and relationships online. So a gendered analysis scaffolds much of my interrogation here. I see tremendous potential in digital media for civic engagement and a re energized democratic future, yet my research indicates a number of ways in which this future is threatened. Therefore, this book is meant to navigate a narrow ledge between the all too common rhetoric of moral panic over the dangers of the internet, especially when the subject is white supremacy, and the uncritical glee over the digital media's transformative potential, especially where race and gender are concerned. Throughout the book, I use a number of specific terms that intend to clarify with the following. So let's break this down. Let's get these definitions absolutely clear. So white supremacy. White supremacy in the United States is a central organizing principle of social life rather than merely an isolated social movement. Facts. Race, as I use the term, is a constructed identity and social category with boundaries that are permeable. The notion that there are distinct races of people is relatively new, historically speaking. While genetic research revives the debate as to whether or not there exists a biological basis for racial categories, I do not subscribe to this view. All scientists have generally concluded, and I've covered this before in a previous video, it's not hard to find on my channel. Yeah, basically, race is a social construct. It is not real. There is no inherent difference between me as a black person or a white person or an Asian person or anything like that. We are all part of the human species. So there is no difference. Of course, race is a social construct that's not real. All right, systemic racism. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the quote unquote color line. Now, at the beginning of a new century, we continue to grapple with the problem. Du Bois, along with a number of other scholars in sociology and other disciplines, has written extensively about racism as an endemic feature of modern society. The term, as I use it here, refers to the way that enduring racial stereotypes, ideas, images, emotions, proclivities, and practices have thoroughly pervaded social, cultural, and economic situations. Though systemic racism has undergone systemic changes over time, primarily through the political struggle organized by people of color, it yet remains a central feature in most major social institutions. Joe R. Fegan has transformed the idea into a theory that explains the American context and argues that systemic racism is a mechanism for maintaining racial inequality that developed with European colonialism, particularly as an ideological justification for the Atlantic Basin slave trade and slavery plantations. The slave based economic systems generated the wealth on which modern Europe and the United States are based. White racial frame. In his frame analysis, Irving Goffman was the first sociologist to develop the notion of frames. His idea was widely adopted by sociologists interested in the study of social movements, and an important trend of identifying concepts as frames has since developed. The term frame refers to the set of labels that receivers affix to social phenomena so as to make sense of them. Building on the sociological tradition and merging it with the explanation of the systemic racism that characterizes the U.S. experience, Fegan has developed the notion of the quote white racial frame that includes the following dimensions. Number one, a white racial framing of society with its racist ideology, stereotypes, and emotions. Two, whites discriminatory actions and an enduring racial hierarchy. And three, pervasively racist institutions maintained by discriminatory whites over centuries. The extensive rationalizing of the white racial frame began in the 1600s as a justification for the economic and racial hierarchy of colonialism and continues even today through constant reinforcement. All right. So, very interesting. I've never learned about frames before, but this is good language to incorporate into my speech when talking about white supremacy. And I would be very interesting. I'd be very interested to read Frame Analysis by Irving Goffman. We have a lot of books on the agenda for this talk. So yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing this series because I really love to read. I really love to read, and I hope my audience likes to read too. Gonna jump into the comments right here. Cracks FN once again goes to prove once again that white supremacy online is a global phenomenon and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. So he is not black. Once again, the Albanians are a confused people, and I want everybody to realize this by looking into the comment section right now. The Albanians are very confused. Cracks FN says, "Bro, once again, I am not your brother. Anyone, I will say this out here. Anyone who is sympathetic to white supremacy is not my brother, bro, or brother, and never could be. Therefore, therefore, call me by my name, call me by my name, which is Simon, which is Simon, or you will get blocked." I want to make this very clear because I think, once again, the Albanians are not very literate, not very intellectual, as they've proven themselves in my comment section, and they are a very confused people. They believe that they are black. This person, Cracks FN, says, "Bro, why you speak bullshits?" Because he doesn't speak English at all. Bullshits, as if bullshit could be a plural noun. Once again, guys, I want to make this clear. If you're not a native English speaker, this channel is generally not going to be friendly to you, especially if you come in attacking me. All right? All right? Well, Cracks FN says he doesn't care if he gets blocked. Cracks FN says he doesn't care if he gets blocked, so he will get blocked after this, after I read this. But he says, "I'm Grek." I assume he means Greek. If you're not a native English speaker, once again, don't come on this channel because you will get roasted. You will get roasted. He says, I'm Grek black and I visit Albania this year and there is no racist people. If you were black, hypothetically, and you did visit Albania, a black person, a true black person, would never discount the experiences of another black person. I'm going to teach the Albanians how to be black very quickly, very quickly. Once again, the same way that you, as a white Albanian person, which you are, Cracks FN, if you heard about an Albanian who went to Germany or went to London and heard about ethnic discrimination or national discrimination against them, but you went to Germany or London and you didn't experience that, you wouldn't then tell that Albanian person, well, there is no racism in Germany or London or whatever, because you didn't experience that. That is not about, you know, that is not being on code. No black person would do that. I've been to, I don't know, Texas many times. I've never been called the N word. But if a black person were to tell me, I visited Texas many times, and every time I went there, they called me the N word, they, as a black man, I would realize that, yeah, their experience is probably very true. Right. So once again, Cracks FN, because you said you don't care if you get blocked, you are getting blocked. You are getting removed from the channel. And yeah, thanks for coming. Everybody is welcome on this channel. But if you say you don't care about getting blocked, you'll get your ass blocked. It's that easy. It's that easy. This is my platform, my channel, and anybody who wants to discuss with me or talk with me, all you have to do, follow me on Twitter. I drop my Twitter. We can have a debate. I will roast you on your horrible English or your horrible ideas, your white supremacist views, everything like that. I'm intellectually strong and physically strong as well. I offered everybody to come and meet me every time I've traveled somewhere, and nobody's shown up because they like to type behind keyboards. They like to say that they'll do this to me or this to my wife. But then when I say I'm here right now, nobody did anything. So once again, the invitation is always open to have intellectual debates or fisticuffs. I am willing to do it all because I will fight and die for everything I believe in. Yes, indeed. All right. So globalization can be broadly defined as the movement of money, capital, and people, labor across time, space, and national boundaries. Globalization also refers to a cultural process that accompanies these flows of capital and labor. Here I am primarily interested in the latter, specifically the dialectical way that white supremacy online shapes and is shaped by cultural values in the United States, and in turn, the way white supremacy online shapes a translocal white identity and a transnational white supremacist culture. Racism has always been an essential condition for capital accumulation and expansion, and that is true in the current era of globalization. Yet, globalization in its present phase is also producing a number of contradictions that are relevant for the analysis that follows. Some scholars contend that globalization and the emergence of the internet represent an important realignment of power away from nation states. Other scholars disagree, saying that globalization requires the existence of a strong state to manage rulemaking and organization so that a stable environment exists to facilitate global investment, and two, maintain social order as global capitalism works against redistribution of wealth. More recently, scholars have noted that rather than undermining state power, the internet has been utilized by the joint forces of repressive governments, China, and internet technology firms, Google, to control and limit access to certain types of content about democracy, for example, within specific geographic boundaries. Later, I will return to the implications globalization, the internet, and the power of nation states have in the fight against white supremacy. Basically, what she's breaking down here is that a lot of people believed that globalization would somehow unify the world, that it would somehow, break down barriers and boundaries, which it has in some cases, but in other cases, it doesn't matter. For example, I don't think we can view the world in that way of like we're all becoming more interconnected and tied naturally through trade, tourism, commerce, that sort of stuff, because the war in Ukraine made no sense. Russia had no incentive really to invade Ukraine. They were doing plenty of business with Ukraine. It's the largest country in the world. Their exports to Europe for natural gas and oil and that sort of stuff were making them billions of dollars hand over fist. That's why Russia has like large gold reserves now and stuff like that. For if Vladimir Putin was thinking like a businessman, he would probably be saying, before the war in Russia, before the war in Ukraine, that business is going pretty well. We're doing pretty well. The country had no national debts or anything like that. Now think about that in reverse. Now where we are now with Russia and Ukraine. Russia is a country that's becoming poorer and poorer each year. The standards of living are getting lower and lower for the average Russian. Hundreds of thousands of Russian men have died. They had a shrinking birth rate before. Now their population is decreasing even more. Now they have to import. Or invite in people from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan to come and work in the country and that sort of stuff. So yeah, everything didn't make sense about the war in Ukraine. But if we followed the globalist logic, the war in Ukraine should have never happened. So yeah, there's some cases where globalization has brought people together and cross boundaries and borders, but it's only been, I would say superficially or surface level, right? Like Western Europe and the European Union. Like, yeah, there is a tacit agreement to keep the EU together, and there's a lot of, cross border travel and cross border exchanges and international relationships and that sort of stuff. But you know, there's still every year we hear about another country that wants to leave the EU, even though it would make no financial sense to them. Look at the UK, right? The UK leaving Brexit, causing Brexit, leaving the EU had no real financial benefit to them. Right. Same thing. They're talking about Spain wants to leave, France wants to leave, Italy, and every country has a exit movement from the EU, which would be financially disastrous for them. Yet and still, these movements still persist. So, continuing here in chapter 1, let's go to her definition of the internet. Precisely defining the internet or cyberspace can be tricky. Take, for example, the much maligned attempt made by U.S. Senator Ted Stevens, a Republican of Alaska, who advised his colleagues on the Senate floor that the internet is not something that you just dump something on. It's not a big truck, it's a series of tubes. Oh, God. Oh God. Yep. Yep. Ted Stevens from Alaska, of course. Republican. 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 Stevens' unintentionally humorous description was mercilessly satirized in the blogosphere and by late night comedians. It is ironic that someone empowered to legislate the internet so profoundly misunderstands the medium. Still, Stevens' blunder is perhaps explicable as there is no clear and consistent definition for the internet or information technology. One fairly basic definition maintains that information technology refers only to computer based systems and the software and hardware that make up computer based systems. While this is a portion of what I consider to be IT, it fails to capture the current technological moment in which digital technologies are shifting away from desktop computing to mobile, wireless, and ubiquitous computing through small handheld devices. In this book, I use interchangeably the terms internet, information technology, web, digital technologies, and occasionally cyberspace. I adopt DiMaggio and colleagues' definition of the internet as the electronic networks that connect people and information through computers and other digital devices, allowing person to person communication and information retrieval. Though we have yet to define it precisely, the internet has had an enormous impact on society as observed by a number of sociologists and various social commentators. In his three-volume work, The Rise of the Network Society, Manuel Castells contends that the internet's societal influence will ultimately be comparable to that of the invention of the alphabet. Wow. Okay. Barry asserts that the internet has contributed to a shift from a group based society to a network based society, and that this shift is decoupling community and geography. Saskia Sassen claims that the internet is a crucial force for the new forms of civic participation, and that internet technology brings with it a destabilizing of older hierarchies of scale and often dramatic rescalings. DiMaggio and colleagues much more cautiously argue that internet technologies have transformative potential for society, noting that the economic and psychological dynamics of web based human communication and potentially distinct enough from those of traditional print and broadcast news media that in time we may see evidence of the internet effect. While none of the academics here posit a unidirectional posit a unidirectional relationship between internet technology and society. Their assertions about transformational potential of the internet are relevant to discussions of race, racism, and white supremacy in the digital era. All right, basically what they're saying here, from my understanding, is that yeah, the internet is not exactly defined. In fact, I'd never thought about that before. How would you define the internet? I would define it as a set of networks and connections between computers and people, right? That's how I would that's how I would define the internet, right? Because the internet can't exist without people, so I would include that in there. But it's a set of network connections between people and computers all across the world. And computers I'm using very broadly to include the smartphones and the smart watches and the tablets and the laptops, everything like that. That's the internet, um, in the networks that those pieces of hardware are connected to. That's how I would define it, right? But she's going to define it. She's going to use words interchangeably: IT, the web, internet, et cetera, et cetera. I find it very interesting that a lot of these sociologists and other, very smart people, smarter people than me, have been saying stuff like, okay, the internet will create a network based society rather than a community based society. But I do think a lot of the times the internet is still very localized, even though, once again, people only use like 4 or 5 different websites: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, etc., YouTube, Google, right? It's still very localized, right? Because the internet in the English world is different than the internet in the French world, right? The internet in the Italian world is different than in the Spanish world. So it's still very localized and separated for different groups of people. So I don't think the network will supersede national or cultural boundaries or language boundaries, because unfortunately a lot of the internet is in English, but a lot of people still use the internet in their local language through the translation services that are provided, right? Anyway, coffee break. All right. Globalization and the internet are often touted as liberatory, beneficial, or even, quote unquote, the key to ensuring a lifetime of success, as suggested by Al Gore, among others. Yet, globalization, a process, and the internet, a network of communication technologies, come together in seemingly contradictory ways. On the one hand, globalization and the internet have combined to foster new economic growth, common cultural values, and undermining of locally driven prejudices and greater awareness of other cultures. On the other hand, critics contend that this economic growth has benefited only an elite few, and that globalization has led to increasing economic inequality and intensification of racism and national chauvinism, and a willingness to restrict civil liberties and democracy. I mean, that's true, right? In the U.S., there are some Republicans talking about banning porn. They want to get rid of the pornography online. Yeah, there's some people that want to do that. They also want to ban certain websites, certain books. Yeah, it's I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that, the internet might cause people with fascist tendencies to be fascist online and to promote their ideas online as well. Continuing here, the organization of the book. In the chapter that follows, I take up several of the more theoretical questions concerning white supremacy online, particularly as related to epistemology, race, and the internet within the context of globalization. Part two is an examination of white supremacy in a global context, and as such, I contrast individual acts of white supremacy with white supremacist online social movements. I discuss the case of Richard Machado, a Mexican American student at UC Irvine, convicted of violating the civil rights of Asian students on campus when he sent them racist emails. I then turned to the subject of white supremacist social movements online and the distinctions between varying degrees of involvement. Once again, I am not surprised by any of these stories. I've not heard about any of the ones she's mentioned so far, but I'm not surprised. Yeah, it sounds a lot like the story of the Asian kid in Berkeley, California, Northern Cal somewhere, who was sending like racist monkey images to like the black girls at school and stuff like that. Once again, Richard, you deserved everything you got. Your name is Richard. You acted like a dick, so you're gonna get treated like a dick. And yeah, he got convicted of violating the civil rights. So he's a felon. I'm glad he's a felon. And it's even more funny because he's Mexican. So he could be even brown himself. Once again, showing that whiteness is a construct that continues to expand, continues to allow more people into the fold. And a lot of Latinos unfortunately want to be in the fold. I covered this in my live stream a few days ago. A lot of Latinos want to be white. And have all the benefits of whiteness and also be a part of the active project of white supremacy in America, right? So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Continuing here. All right. In part three, I continue the empirical investigation of white supremacy online in four chapters that each address white supremacist discourse as it has moved from the print only era to the digital era. In chapter five, I look at gender and white supremacy online within a global context. Specifically, I juxtapose a transnational, quote unquote, ladies only discussion board at a white supremacist site with two case studies of virtual and actual harassment of white supremacists. The ladies only section of Stormfront. How many people do you think are actually ladies in that section? How many do you think are actually like, little sissies who secretly have like a black bull that they want to cuck them? You get what I'm saying? Like, there is no ladies section in Stormfront. There is no ladies section in Stormfront. There is no like. I refuse to believe that. This is the first lie in this book. The ladies section of Stormfront. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. What do they talk about in there? Like how to put swastika on your nails. You get what I'm saying? Like was that the birthing of the trad wives? Did they come from the ladies section of Stormfront? I'm continuing here. So I juxtapose a transnational ladies only discussion board at a white supremacist site with two case studies of virtual and actual harassment by white supremacists. In chapter six, I followed the translation of five previously print only white supremacist publications onto the web to examine how social movement discourse has or has not changed for each. In chapter seven, I addressed cloaked sites, which. Sorry, I lost it. In chapter seven, I addressed cloaked sites, which at first appear to be legitimate civil rights sites, but are in fact fronts for white supremacist sites. These digital forms of propaganda have significance for contested racial politics within a global context of a networked information. Of networked information, pardon. In chapter 8, I move beyond a text only analysis of the discourse of websites and begin to consider how their audiences make sense of them, with a particular focus on young people interpreting cloaked white supremacist sites. In the final section, part 4, I look at what is being done to combat online white supremacy in the digital era. In chapter 9, I explore the oppositional transnational efforts by individuals, organizations, and governments. Most nations in the industrialized North and West view racism on and off line radically differently from their counterparts in the United States, who are fond of protecting even bigotry as free speech, of course. And finally, in chapter 10, I address racial justice and civic engagement in the digital era, arguing that arguing that white racial frame, arguing that while the white racial frame complicates identifying white supremacy on and offline, the task is made clearer with critical race consciousness. I conclude the chapter in the book by calling for a complete reassessment of how we acquire and produce knowledge about race in a global networked era and how this informs social movements, organizing, pedagogical pedagogical practice and engagement in civil society and life in a democracy. All right, looking forward to reading this book. That's been chapter 1. She breaks down a lot of interesting stuff, gave a lot of great details and tidbits of knowledge. Once again, I will not be reading the notes. You can scan the notes, pause them, pause this channel if you want to read them yourself, or actually pick up the book, which you can buy on Amazon for what, the humble price of $48, brand new. Anyway, this will be the last chapter we're reading today. This is chapter 2, Theorizing White Supremacy Online. So, race is under construction in cyberspace, said Lisa Nakamura. The internet and the stories we tell about it have become our collective vision of the future. One of the pervasive myths about the internet is that it allows us to escape race, racism, and racial inequality. In the late 1990s, the notion was evocatively captured in a television advertisement for a telecom giant MCI when the narrator assured the viewer that here there is no race and then asked rhetorically, Utopia? The answer, no. Internet. That internet might allow us to escape from embodiment, from racial and gender identity, and indeed from oppression and inequality altogether, is a powerful idea that resonates broadly in mainstream post civil rights era U.S. culture, as well as in much of the social theory developed to explain the internet. Yet the presence of white supremacy online debunks the myth and necessitates a critical inspection of race and the internet from a sociological perspective. I think about sometimes the quote online that there are no girls on the internet. I think about that quote, right? Sometimes, not all the time. It's not like I'm in the gym. Are there girls on the internet? No, there's no girls in the ladies section of Stormfront. That's for sure. But the quote, there's no girls on the internet, it was the type of quote that says that online gender does not exist. But you never heard anybody say there are no boys online, right? People often say that there is no X thing when they want to try to. And I need to put on mute my WhatsApp. I don't know why I keep on getting these messages. It's blocking the text. But people often say that there is no something online when they just want erasure from it, when they don't even want to deal with it or acknowledge it. And a lot of times this comes from the dominant society. When I speak about anti-blackness, when I go somewhere, the automatic response from people who come from that society who are not open-minded enough to acknowledge that somebody can have a different experience, especially if they have a very different skin texture or color or whatever, right? They're going to be saying like, that doesn't exist. We don't want to deal with that. We don't want to hear your truth, so that doesn't exist, right? They barely can allow the idea of that sexism or homophobia can exist in their society when a lot of people are conditioned to brush those things away and not acknowledge them. So of course they're going to be quick to, mark those things out as well and say that we don't want to deal with them. We don't want to talk about them. We don't want to interact with it as well. So yeah, the idea that the internet was supposed to be a utopia where there was, no race or gender for people. It was only basically, in my opinion, the type of like whitewashing of people, if that makes sense. Like, we don't want to deal with blackness. We don't want to deal with sexism. We don't want to deal with homophobia online. So the internet idealists, who probably had good intentions, probably were just saying stuff like, we don't want any of that here because we don't want to actually, deal with those issues. But the issues sort of came with it because as more people came online, they brought their ideas, they brought their ways of being, their habits, their beliefs, and yeah, now we have Stormfront, now we have 4chan, now we have X or Twitter as it's called. Continuing here. So, social theories about race and the internet can help make sense of white supremacy in the digital era. Unfortunately, most theories about race do not take the internet into account, and most theories about the social aspect of the internet do not take race into account. Sociologists, for reasons that remain puzzling to me, have been generally slow to take up the challenge of studying the internet, particularly those interested in the intersections of race, class, and gender. Daniel Bell, writing in the 1970s, was among the earliest sociologists to study digital media. Sociology's major theoretical traditions each have different insights regarding the internet. Marxists tend to focus on elite control of production and politics through cultural hegemony and increased surveillance. Weberians, never heard that word before, but it's referring to Max Weber, the sociologist, I guess. Weberians emphasize elements and rationalization facilitated by the internet's capability to reduce limits of time and space, and they highlight distinctive status cultures within the digital media landscape. Durkheimians focus attention Durkheimians focus attention on the way digital media reinforce shared cultural values and organic solidarity. Critical theorists problematize the effects of technological change on political deliberation and the integrity of civil society. Notably absent from any of these mainstream analyses of the sociology of the internet is any discussion of race. Eminent sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois is frequently left off the roster of founding sociologists, and I do not mean to repeat that mistake here. Cultural critic Kalital was among the first to point out that Du Bois's work sorry that Du Bois's work offers sophisticated tools for the analysis of cyberculture, in part because of African Americans' experiences of liminality as a result of hundreds of years of racist oppression. I have to look up the word liminality. Let's look that up. Liminality definition. Liminality. In anthropology, liminality is the quality of ambiguity or disorientation that occurs in the middle stage of a rite of passage when participants no longer hold their pre-ritual status but have yet to begun the transition to the status that they hold when the rite is complete. So yeah, it's basically like being in the middle. Like, here's the graphic that sort of explains it here for anybody who wants to see. Liminal. It's like being in the middle, no longer the thing you were before, but not yet the thing you wish to become. right? So that's what liminal means, or liminality, right? And W.E.B. Du Bois is somebody that I wish I quoted in my entrance to, or my application to enter the sociology department at the university I would study, because it's so funny. I was literally listening to Mark Lamont Hill interview some other black scholar today on YouTube while I was cleaning the house, and yeah, he pointed out that W.E.B. Du Bois is not listed often as one of the founders of sociology, which he should, right? He should be, right? uh, but it's so interesting. Now I'm reading this book, and this woman is pointing this out as well, going to showing that this sort of idea that W.E.B. Du Bois is underrated or uncredited for his work in this field of the humanities has been widespread or known amongst people who have been academics, and it needs to be pushed. Yeah, W.E.B. Du Bois, as far as the liminality of the African American experience, he's basically saying, like, black people, we're sort of stuck in the limbo of, you know, not being fully accepted as human, but definitely not being in the stage anymore of being seen as something animal, something barbaric, something less than, much less than human. We're sort of seen in the middle, in the liminality of the black male experience when it comes to the internet, right? Like online, they either want erasure of our race, or we possibly want to attack blackness, or anybody who wants to speak up about black issues. So yeah, the liminality of our experience, all in our real lives, and also in our online lives, is very present, and Du Bois should be studied about that. This is just from my nascent understanding of this term that I've just picked up literally 2 minutes ago. But yeah, continuing here. All right. Understanding race in the information age. The information age is as racialized as the previous industrial age. In her book Cybertypes, cultural studies scholar Lisa Nakamura criticizes the notion that the internet is a raceless utopia, and demonstrates precisely how using interface design elements like pull down menus with categorical lists of racial and ethnic identities, the online world reproduces racial identity constructed offline. Nakamura coined the term identity tourism to describe the process by which members of one group try on for size the descriptors generally applied to persons of another race or gender. The link between racial oppression and visibility has been discussed eloquently by African American scholars since Du Bois, and emerges in discussions of race, as in this passage from Mark Hansen. The suspension of the racial category of visibility in online environments transforms the experience of race in what is potentially a fundamental way. By suspending the automatic ascription of racial signifiers according to visible traits, online environments can, in a certain sense, be said to subject everyone to what I shall call a 0 degree of racial difference. That's very interesting. And I don't know if she's going to say this, but it will come up. It will come up. If you've ever played Xbox Live, if you've ever been in an online chat room, there might be no drop down menu where you select your race as black or Asian or white or something like that. But everybody gets called the hard R. On 4chan, you don't know who's black, who's white, but everybody's throwing around the N word. So while there might be no girls on the internet, or there's no race on the internet, everybody, or at least a good proportion of people, are calling each other hard R online. You get what I'm saying? And that's not cool. That should not happen. Okay. So anyway, jumping into the comments, got a new comment here. Aka said, "Hello, hello to you." Shout out to Aka, ACA, whoever you are. Hello. We are reading the book Cyber Racism. This is the beginning of my book React series. I hope you enjoy the text. We're talking about white supremacy online. If you care about fighting anti-black racism, if you care about defeating white supremacy, stay in, listen, learn. If you don't care about that, please leave. Please unsubscribe. Continuing here. So, understanding race in the information age, we already read this part. Yet the supposed invisibility online and the decoupling identity from any analogical relation to the visible body rest in part on an assumption that the internet is an exclusively text-based medium in which racial identity is not visible. While that may have been true at one point in time or may be true today in certain online contexts, it does not adequately describe the majority of life online now. Today's internet is full of digital video, photographic technology such as webcams, photo sharing sites like Flickr.com, and video sharing sites like YouTube.com. Most social networking sites such as MySpace.com and Facebook.com prominently feature digital photos and videos that serve as important markers of digital representation and identity for the users. Indeed, as the name Facebook suggests, the notion of linking visual representation of the physical body to text is the whole point. And in the white supremacist online forum, stormfront.org, each registered user chooses a digital photo or graphic representation of their online identity. Clearly, visual technologies inherently link the physical to the gendered and racialized virtual world. Furthermore, empirical research increasingly demonstrates that people go online, even to text only online spaces, not in search of some disembodied libertarian utopia, but to engage in the construction and affirmation of embodied racial identities. The Kali.com. And these identities are in turn shaped by power relations. To the extent that race is ever discussed in scholarly literature about the internet, it is usually framed around issues of racial and ethnic identity, with precious little discussion devoted to issues of race and epistemology as they relate to life online. Basically, from what I'm understanding here, like yeah, in the beginning, the internet was like all text based, like just chat rooms and stuff like that. ASL, where you at? Stuff like that, and everybody was getting called hard R. But yeah, now with social media, Facebook, MySpace, that shows you how old this book is. But generally true, a lot of people have their racial identity is identifiable online, even if they're not showing their faces all the time online. And sometimes you can even tell by what somebody writes, what their background is, or by their information that they choose to disclose online on social media, lets you kind of take a hint or guess on what their racial quote unquote background might be, right? And yeah, a lot of times if people do go back into the text-based world, whether that be 4chan or the Kali. The 4chan is meant for places where a lot of schizophrenic white supremacists go and circle jerk each other, and the Kali is a black website where a lot of black men supposedly go online and circle jerk each other too, and say ridiculous things to make each other laugh and stuff like that. Two different identities, but both still based on some sort of racial identity, I would say. Right? Very interesting parts here. Continuing here. Hold up, wait. I got my cord stuck in my chair. But let's continue here. We're almost done for today. Oh, once again, only 2 chapters a day, but we will finish this book hopefully by Thursday. Let's see. So, epistemology and white supremacy online. The presence of white supremacy online raises some compelling questions of epistemology, the investigation of how we actually know what we claim to know. David Duke and other white supremacists like him have a vested interest in redefining truth in ways that promote their versions of racial enlightenment and that undermine racial equality. The fact that in the digital era, white supremacists online have rebranded racial truth calls into question any cultural value that asserts racial equality. Let's read that again. The fact that in the digital era, white supremacists online have rebranded racial truths calls into question any cultural value that asserts racial equality. Since the rebranding calls into question what constitutes the truth we say we know about race, racism, and racial inequality. Basically, what they're saying here, from my understanding, is that, the racial realism and the science online is trying to make us question some things that we've sort of agreed upon as a society and what scientists have validated as truth. So just having that information out there sort of muddies the waters. It makes it hard for people to discern truth from fiction when it comes to, all right, what is race really? Why are people different colors? Is there any truth to intelligence being tied to race and that sort of stuff? So yeah, that's how I interpret that sentence here. So, traditional epistemologies tied to enlightenment, notions of reason and objectivity, divorced from lived experience, suggest that universal truth is knowable. Scientists committed to such an epistemology follow strict methodological rules intended to distance themselves from the values, vested interests, and emotions generated by their race, class, gender, sexuality, or unique lived experience. Despite these aspirations, though, both empiricism and rationalism have facilitated racism from the 17th century onward, as David Theo Goldberg has thoroughly documented in his book racist culture. As a consequence, race is one of the central conceptual inventions of modernity, one that shapes our perception of social objects, fellow human beings, in primarily racial terms. As for understanding racial inequality, this sort of epistemology, detached from an acknowledgement awareness of race, is what philosopher Charles W. Mills calls an inverted epistemology, an epistemology of ignorance, producing the ironic outcome that whites will, in general, be unable to understand the world that they themselves have made. What follows from this epistemology is a white racial frame, or lens, through which the social world is interpreted and misunderstood. White supremacy online is found in an epistemology of ignorance in which whites who adopt the white racial frame are unable to see the world they have created and their privileged position within it, but instead configure themselves as victims. Oh, yes, they love to play the victim, white supremacists online. But what about black on black crime? What about me growing up poor in a trailer park? I'm not even going to dignify it, but you'll never see more crybabies online than you will white supremacists. Seriously. So, some feminists and postmodern theorists argue that knowledge is always partial, situated, and embodied. Such an epistemology renders universal truth an impossibility, since only a relational truth between knower and known is possible. Postmodern epistemologies also call into question the notion of social justice, if not render it altogether impossible, since without truth there is no standard from which to judge justice. In many ways, cyberspace is the realization of postmodern epistemologies, creating an unrestricted publication of ideas without reference to the traditional publishing gatekeepers and allowing identity formation wholly unconnected to geography. Uh, Geographically rooted identities, pardon. In this new digital era, all ideas, and indeed all our identities, are up for renegotiation. White supremacy online exploits uniquely web based mechanisms to undermine civil rights and values of racial equality with overtly racist and anti Semitic speech. As such, we must re examine how we make and evaluate knowledge claims and reconceive our vision for social justice in this new digital terrain. These competing epistemologies create a theoretical impasse, with one rooted in Enlightenment ideals of objective truth, supposedly disconnected from lived experience, and the other recognizing lived experience without any ethical ground on which to found claims of social justice. Sociologist Patricia Hill Collins suggests a possible resolution by offering a third alternative, an epistemology in which ideas cannot be divorced from the individuals who create and share them. Instead, Collins's Black feminist epistemology establishes lived experiences, ethics, and reason and interconnected essential components for assessing knowledge claims. Since values are the heart of the knowledge validation process in this alternative epistemology, inquiry always had an ethical aim. And it is imperative that those who value racial equality not only have an apparatus for evaluating knowledge claims, but also train their focus on the ethical aim of racial equality. Thus, this third alternative epistemology of black feminist thought is crucial for evaluating the knowledge claims in white supremacy online that challenges the basis of racial equality. So, yeah, basically what they're trying to summarize, or what Jesse is saying here in these two paragraphs, is that, online we have different sorts of discourse. We have people who make claims based on statistics and facts and per capitas. We know who the per capitas are and that sort of stuff. And yeah, they're making their claims about black inferiority and white superiority based on knowledge or facts. Meanwhile, a lot of the people who advocate for social justice base their things on anecdotes and experience, but also a lot of facts as well, since a lot of the statistics that the white supremacists pull out are not true. And so the battle is seen to be between, the personal experiences of people who have been marginalized and oppressed, and the dominant society who seeks to beat the other group over the head with what they believe to be facts, the knowledge claims they say. And the sociologist here, Patricia Hill, says, let's center, fighting for equality, racial equality as the focus, and let's assess knowledge or truth, or try to find truth through sort of combining the two things. Collins' Black feminist epistemology establishes lived experiences, ethics, and reason as interconnected. So basically, we can decide if something is unjust or untrue based on sort of combining all of those things in our head. You know, how would you feel in that situation? Having some empathy. What is the morally right thing to do in that situation? You know, ethics, reason. You know, how can we reason somebody being treated this way or viewed this way, right? And yeah, sort of combining all of that to reach some truth in the way we uh, combining all of those things to reach a sense of truth and justice, right? So it's an interesting way of looking at it. I just think it's more important to debunk the white supremacists with their facts, which are factually wrong, and also just continue to highlight that there is no real difference between the races of people. You know, when we eliminate skin and that sort of stuff, but also yes, in using logic, using reason, using ethics to debate their stupid ideas, if it's even worth debating at all, right? So this investigation into white supremacy online also raises theoretical questions about how social movement rhetoric differs online and in print. It also raises questions about how social movements with vested political interests use digital media to contest what is true and what is not. Those who produce and participate in white supremacy have not adapted uniformly to the advent of the internet. Some white supremacists who have maintained a continuous presence in print for many years are not online today. Others that once published white supremacist newsletters have simply copied and pasted printed text onto one way information transfer brochure like websites. And others still have been incredibly savvy, even prescient, in understanding the potential of the internet for furthering their ideological gains. This technologically evolved white supremacy is especially menacing when we remember that young people are increasingly sure of political truths, one in the sphere of public opinion concerning racial equality and civil rights. Sociologist Manuel Castells argues that social movements in the information age try to influence cultural values. I concur and argue that white supremacy online is undermining the value of racial equality, whether or not that is a shared value, as Dirk Hemians might suggest, or simply reflect the systematic racism and white racial frame that sustains and reinforces an enduring racial inequality, as Fegan suggests, will be addressed at length throughout the text. Words that wound in the information age. White supremacy online is a global issue and creates new challenges for critical race theory, and specifically for the idea that words can wound. That is, that hate speech causes real harm in real life. Critical race theory places race at the center of the analysis, with the stories of victims of hate speech at the starting point. Those who believe that speech can do lasting harm understand that urgency of addressing the problem posed by white supremacy online. Speech does do harm. Yes, speech does do harm. Not only does it hurt the person, and it's not a nice thing to do, your speech can motivate somebody else to do something wicked, evil, violent, right? Like all the racists on 4chan who motivated Peyton Gentrin to walk into that Walmart and slaughter a bunch of black people. Same thing with Dylan Roof walking into the church as well. All right. So here comes another person, presumably from Albania, coming to stand up for the country, which I will always respect somebody standing up for their nation, but I will not respect somebody who tries to continue to disavow the views of a person who has a lived experience. And this person is Sonar Patch. He is a Pakistani person. And as a Pakistani person, I wonder how he would feel if I were to tell him that in the UK they call Pakistani people Pakis. They tell them to go back to their country. They tell them to stop cooking their disgusting smelling curries and all that sort of stuff. All this wicked stuff that the white supremacists like to say about Pakistani people. And then he were to tell me that, and I were to tell him that there is no racism in the UK. If you are a person living in a Western developed world, Western developed nation like the UK, like America, of course, and that sort of stuff like that, it is very imperative on you to be on the front lines against white supremacy. But people like Sarnor Patch in the comments, who I will read his comment soon, goes to show that in Islam, because if he's Pakistani, it's very likely that he is a Muslim. In Islam, there is sympathy for white supremacists. There is tacit acceptance of anti-blackness. There is no willingness to actually fight against the forces of white supremacy that have not only destroyed the lives of black people in the West, but also have destroyed Pakistan. The U.S. regularly sends drone strikes into Pakistan to slaughter innocent Pakistani people. The U.S. generally goes into Pakistan and does whatever the hell they want to murder people that look like Sonora Patch, presumably if he is of Pakistani descent. But people like Sonora Patch goes to show that white supremacy online is a major problem, that anti-blackness in the Islamic world, in the Muslim world, is a big problem as well. And Sonora Patch is a person who definitely needs to be reading this book along with me. But unfortunately, there are people like Sonora Patch who just come online to spew their own talking points, to just try to erase the idea that any sort of anti-blackness could actually exist. Sonora Patch is a person who is more concerned with supporting the system of white supremacy than actually trying to dismantle it. Because if you think for a second that I go online to say an entire nation, an entire people are racist, that is not true. I have never once said that the entire nation of any place is racist. I have only spoken out against anti-blackness. But Sonora Patch is a person who probably doesn't understand English very well because his first language is probably Urdu or something like that. He probably doesn't understand English that well. That I have always used the present perfect tense whenever speaking about my experiences as a black person. But I've always used the definitive present simple text when talking about white supremacy in the world, that anti-blackness is real, that white supremacy is real. Sonora Patch is a person who is uneducated, unfortunately, and we're just going to be doing the Kim to it. We're going to skim through it for these things here. All right? So let's go through it. Sonora Patch says, I think it's dangerous to single out a whole nation and call it the most racist. Once again, Sonora Patch is a stupid person. Sonora Patch does not Sonora Patch does not understand the present simple tense. The present perfect tense, pardon. The present perfect tense class is important. The present perfect tense is important. This is a lesson for everybody here. If anybody can find the video, I challenge Sonora Patch and anybody on my channel right now. If you find the video where I say this place is the most racist nation, I will delete my channel. See, Sonora Patch is a racist person. This is his, see, he has revealed himself. And I invite Sonora Patch to come on my Twitter to actually debate and to reveal himself as what he really is, a brown person who upholds white supremacy. Meanwhile, in his nation, there are rampant floods. In Pakistan, the people are literally eating out of the streets, taking shit in the streets. And their nation has been ravaged by white supremacy, colonized by the British, slaughtered their people, extorted them for opium and all of their natural resources and that sort of stuff. As a Kashmiri person, he is actually being even more oppressed by the, oh God. All right, so Sonora Patch is not even worth discussing with and that sort of stuff. He is a racist Muslim. Unfortunately, we have a lot of racist Muslims in the world. And Sonora Patch is the person who it's not even worth discussing. It's not even worth getting into it because he is actually not even worth having that discussion with because he didn't come into this live stream in good faith. He didn't come into this with good faith. And unfortunately, that is the reason why Kashmir will continue to be oppressed by the Indian people who are supported by the British government, by the way, because they don't want to see an independent Kashmir. And the white supremacist superstructure in the UK that continues to oppress the Muslim people there and the non-white Englanders, English, and stuff like that. That will continue to happen because of people like Sonora Patch. But I'll let him, get his comments off in the comment section. Y'all can read them or y'all can be entertained by this text. But it's not worth engaging with people like that. I left my Twitter for anybody who wants to have an actual discussion with me. We'll debate all of these points and get them out of the way, and we'll prove how incoherent you sound. But yeah, let's continue here. So, words that wound in the information age. We already read the first paragraph talking about how it needs to be considered that these sorts of racist terms actually do cause damage. They cause damage to the people that they are directed towards, and also it causes damage by other people who could be influenced to do violence on behalf of white supremacists online. So, after the UN's 2001 World Conference on Racism in South Africa identified the internet as a crucial mechanism for both spreading and combating racism, racial hatred, xenophobia, and racial discrimination, and related intolerance, a number of nations decided to address online racism. In 2002, for example, the acting Race Discrimination Commissioner of Australia, Dr. William Jonas, convened a symposium on cyber racism to raise awareness and generate policy options. In 2003, for the Council of Europe, COE, comprised of 44 member states, drafted a protocol intended to shut down racist and xenophobic websites. The protocol, signed by 12 member states, reflects a strong European stance against hate speech online and stands in stark contrast to the American view that white supremacist rhetoric ought to be protected as free speech. One legal scholar refers to these divergent reactions to white supremacy online as the US Europe cyber hate divide. The cyber hate divide also means that the United States is the global destination of choice for those wishing to create and distribute white supremacy online without fear of prosecution. It is critically important that we consider white supremacy online in a global context and understand how the United States position on quote unquote protected speech undermines global efforts to combat this insidious racism. So basically, what they're saying, the European Union and other nations have come together to try to shut down, sites like Stormfront, like 4chan, and hell, even X or Twitter or something like that. And basically, the United States has said free speech. Free speech. Of course, the home of white supremacy is going to try to do whatever it can to have a blanket approach to free speech because they want to allow free speech to exist so that people can have an excuse for spreading misinformation, spreading lies, spreading racial realism, and all that sort of stuff. That needs to be, actually, you know, destroyed. It does need to be erased. There does need to be something out there that basically gets rid of all of that stuff. But the U.S. is behind on that. Why? Free speech. But there should be limits of free speech, of course, right? Like in most other countries, in the UK and in Canada, right? You can't just go online or in person shouting racial slurs at people. Like in Germany, you can't just be blatantly anti-Semitic and stuff like that. That sort of thing needs to be everywhere, I would argue. That needs to be everywhere. So, yeah, I'm gonna continue here into the chat. All right. So, research design and methodological framework. Sociology's established research design and methodologies are in a state of flux, sending scholars scrambling to determine which methods are suitable to the task of investigating society in the digital era. Faced with such a transformation in the discipline's established research design and methodologies, I chose to adapt traditional research design frameworks and methods and improvise some new elements. The overall design of this study was inspired by Wendy Griswold's conceptualization of the cultural diamond, quote unquote. In her conceptualization of Griswold's establishes four connected points that are crucial to the analysis of any cultural artifact: producer, text, social context, and audience. For my purpose, I adapt Griswold's diamond for use with digital media. For my purpose, I adapt Griswold's diamond for use with digital media. I explore a range of white supremacist websites as text and also examine products and text through postings at the white supremacist discussion boards at stormfront.org. In this, I drew on the few but important exemplars of virtual ethnographies. Throughout this book, I explore the social context, both North American and transnational, in which white supremacy online appears using a variety of secondary sources. I was also interested in how young people who might be considered an audience for white supremacist sites made sense of what they inadvertently encountered while searching for information online. This is growing and widely inter this sorry this is a growing and widely interdisciplinary field in digital media and learning that examines how the internet is transforming social life and learning, particularly for young people who have grown up with digital technologies. While some important work looking at race online has been undertaken in this field, to date there are only a handful of studies that specifically seek to understand how young learners are affected by white supremacy online. This study is intended to contribute to the emerging field of study by considering just a link. By considering just such a link. I employed a mixed method study design and selected the more efficacious method for answering the theoretical questions I wanted to explore. These methods include ethnographic observation of a white supremacist online forum, qualitative discourse analysis of web text and graphic design, layout and images, secondary analysis of web analytics, case studies, and auto ethnography and autoethnography. Interesting. In addition, I developed an innovative combination of experiment, usability study, and in depth interview in which I asked young people to try and distinguish between legitimate civil rights websites and cloaked white supremacist sites. See methods appendix for further discussion. What I found from this mixed method analysis is that old forms of overt white supremacy, for example, race hate speech, have entered the digital era alongside new emergent forms of white supremacy that include mass email usernames, um, participatory discussion boards, overtly racist online games, and covertly racist websites with obfuscated propaganda addressing the meaning of civil rights. What I found from talking with young people is both disturbing and disheartening. Today's urban, multicultural, internet savvy youth are not likely to be recruited into white supremacist organizations merely by stumbling upon a website. That said, most of those I interviewed had difficulty distinguishing between cloaked white supremacist websites and legitimate civil rights websites. All right. Social movement rhetoric in print and online, a naturally occurring experiment. In his analysis of virtual fascism in cyberculture, Les Beck asserts that there is both little discussion in the literature that examines the ways in which the extreme rights has utilized the medium, and almost no understanding of how white supremacy online relate to the previous media incarnations. Anecdotes to my study is another in which I examine white supremacist discourse. Sorry, Antecedent to my study is another in which I examine white supremacist discourse in printed media. Specifically, I analyzed over 300 individual newsletters published by 5 different white supremacist groups, identifying themes in text and images. The sample for that study spanned the year 1970 to 1993, and that arbitrary end date turned out to be significant. Shortly after 1993, white supremacists such as Don Black and David Duke began using the internet as part of their social movement communication and media strategy. The timing of this development meant that I had a naturally occurring experiment for examining and understanding digital media and social movement discourse that would allow for prior and post internet comparison. As far as I know, this is the first study to date that does such a comparison, and therefore, this research is intended to help bridge the gap in our knowledge about how social movement rhetoric is or is not transformed through digital media. Not all white supremacy online is part of organized social movement, as I discuss in the following chapter with an examination of individual acts of white supremacy online. Conclusion. Though this book is intended to make a number of theoretical and methodological contributions, it is primarily intended as an empirical work, illuminating how the discourse of one particular social movement, white supremacy, has been translated into the digital era. The methodological design, inspired by Griswold's framework, is meant to draw a fuller picture of this cultural phenomenon that would an examination that only looks at movement discourse. Let's repeat. The methodological design inspired by Griswold's framework is meant to draw a fuller picture of this cultural phenomenon than would an examination that only looks at movement discourse. So basically what she's saying is like we have a big tent to look at all of these things that relate to white supremacy online, the different ways people are disseminating this information, and that's different than just okay, let's just check Stormfront for today, right? Like let's have a broader view, and I like that. So I'm very looking forward to reading more from this book. So, to summarize this book's theoretical themes in the broadest terms, I want to understand how racism and white supremacy manifest online, the speed and ease with which hate speech travels across national boundaries, and the willingness of repressive regimes to regulate internet content that has to do with democracy and democratic ideals of equality, raises certain challenges to critical race theory, which has presented a strong case for the regulation of hate speech. Namely, it asks how free speech might be balanced with equality and human rights within a democratic society. Further, I explore the connection between extremist white supremacy and more mundane expressions of white identity and the racial frame for defining the terms of the debate about race and controlling the product of knowledge. I assert the threat of white supremacy online in a democratic society is less about the supposed threat of recruitment of political mobilization than it is about the real epistemological challenge it poses to undermining the very basis of racial equality. Finally, I explore the theoretical implications of white supremacy online for understanding the tensions between globalization and the forces of entitlement. In the following chapter, I begin the empirical investigation with a case study that illustrates many of the themes of globalization and the internet and the way that these two forces combine to enable individual acts of white supremacy online. So, that's the end of chapter 2. Looking forward to reading chapter 3. We will finish chapters. We'll start in part 2, white supremacy in a global context, beginning here on chapter 3, individual acts of white supremacy. Then we'll move to chapter 4, and those will be our 2 chapters for tomorrow's session, class, video stream, whatever you want to call it. This is going to continue to be an educational channel. Looking forward to hearing what people have to say in the comments regarding this text. It's actually very readable. It's not that dense. It's not that too jargony. It's not too, you know, ivory tower. It's actually a very readable text. It's very understandable, and looking forward to learning more and seeing where this goes. The first, the preface, the chapter 1 and chapter 2 really just break down what the book will be, while also dropping like hints and facts here about different events related to white supremacy online, and events that have happened because of white supremacy online. So very interested to see where she goes with this. Shout out to Jesse. What was her name again? Sorry, Jesse Daniels. Sorry. Jesse Daniels. Yes. Shout out to Jesse Daniels. I encourage everybody to check out her book. Get it on Amazon if you're interested in this sort of thing. If you have any book suggestions that we read for Book React, put it in the chat, put it in the comments. We will be reacting to more books here. We're going to finish this book hopefully by Thursday, and we'll have a very interesting discussion afterwards. But so far, so good. Really liking it. Shout out to everybody who came into the chat. Shout out to the 2 white supremacists who got blocked. Machiavelli 24, as a Muslim, he doesn't represent all Muslims. I don't know, Machiavelli 24, if you were referring to me or to the racist Pakistani man who got blocked. But yeah, shout out to Craxed FN. Shout out to Illyrian. Shout out to everybody who jumped into the chat. Shout out to Andre Beja. And yeah, shout out to the 4,000 new subscribers. It's going to be a good year on my channel. And catch y'all tomorrow. Don't know what time I'll come on, but turn on those notifications.